So first of all, I want to thank MEF and Dario and Susan and TJ for putting on this event and inviting us to speak. So thank you so much. So my name is Caitlin. I am the Senior Manager of Messaging Products at the CWTA. A lot of you might know who the CWTA is, but a lot of you might not be super familiar with who we are. So I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes to explain who the CWTA is and what our role is when it comes to A2P messaging. So the CWTA is, for all intents and purposes, the Canadian equivalent of the CTIA. So we're the Wireless Industry Association for Canada. We're a member-based nonprofit trade association. A lot of what we do is lobbying for our members, a lot of whom are wireless service providers, handset manufacturers, but then a lot of the folks in this room are also members of CWTA, kind of in a more focused capacity. Also similar to CTIA, CWTA is the Common Short Code Administrator in Canada. And we have a bit of a unique role when it comes to short codes. So we do the lease administration. We maintain a database of available short codes, of short codes that are in use, but we have a bit more of a hands-on approach when it comes to short codes in Canada. So we work directly with the carriers, kind of end to end. So from the point of the actual lease application through to the provisioning of the short code itself. And so that direct relationship that we have with the carriers really allows us to have an in-depth understanding of kind of how the carriers want the A2P ecosystem to run. And I know that, obviously the A2P ecosystem extends beyond just short codes, but I think short codes really kind of help to pave the way for other A2P messaging channels. And so, our short code guidelines, for example, have kind of been the foundation for how other A2P channels run today. I think that's probably the case in the US as well. So that put us in a good position to then take a little bit more of, take on more of a role outside of just short code administration. So that now includes A2P messaging best practices. So CWTA, at the request of our carrier members, put out, or is working on putting out, a Canadian A2P messaging best practices document, again, kind of built off of the foundation of short codes. And I think, another thing that is unique, or maybe not unique, but special about Canada is that, we're a small market, so the hands-on approach that I talked about with short codes is really only doable because we're a small market. But we're also a close-knit group of folks in the industry, in the messaging space. So CWTA has a messaging council, and a lot of the people that are on that council were involved in the development of the A2P messaging best practices. And we really strive to provide an open forum and platform where all of the industry leaders can really come together and discuss emerging trends, new use cases, common issues or pain points. And we're really collaborative when it comes to working on solving those issues. And so I also get to work very closely with Paul here. He's the chair of that council. And a lot of the folks in this room are heavily involved. And so I'm gonna pass it over to Paul now, and he's just gonna talk a little bit about kind of the current A2P ecosystem in Canada.
I'm gonna talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay. So also thanks to MEF. One of the reasons that we're up here talking as well is we're drawing attention to the next MEF event that's in Toronto in July. That's going to be a combined MEF event with our regular face-to-face Mobile Content Council meeting that we have. And that committee brings what Caitlin was talking about that I chair. That brings together all the carriers. Even tell us now, Ryan, thank you. Into a room with aggregators, CSPs, brands, ISVs, to have meaningful discussions about what the hurdles are with A2P messaging, what's the latest on MMS, what's the latest on 10DLC in Canada, to sort of areas that we need to make some progress in, and we're able to have those conversations, and then we actually are able to go out and enjoy each other's company afterwards and have some cocktails, and that's usually where most stuff gets done anyways. So what makes Canada unique, as Caitlin was saying, we are a small country, but just so everybody understands, we are a different country than the US. It's a different country, we have different laws, we have different regulations, but that doesn't mean that it's a more complex channel for A2P messaging either. But that said, even though there's not, I wouldn't say there's vast differences in requirements and compliance between Canada and the US, there are differences, and it's important to understand those. And one thing to understand is that on the surface, if you're verified to run traffic on A2P in one country, it doesn't mean that you're verified to run traffic in that other country. We in this industry, we try to streamline those processes for our customers and our brands, but there are different regulations, and we won't get into those now. We'll talk about those at the MCC in Toronto. But it's important to understand those to keep it. What I like about Canada is it's a low friction. It is a low friction A2P channel. So getting in, whether you're using short codes or whether you're using toll free, Canada is still pretty low friction, and I heard maybe some contrary stuff, but I also believe that it's a low cost market compared to other global markets. So maybe not the US in particular, but global markets, Canada still represents a very low cost market to get into. And as Caitlin was saying, the work that we do with drafting best practices, the other role that I play is I come from ZipWhip, and so we've, in partnership with the carriers, developed a toll-free channel for A2P messaging in Canada. And that's a carrier channel. That's not a ZipWhip channel or a Twilio channel. And it's really important that when we developed that channel, that we had an equitable approach to compliance and what the requirements were. So somebody else said it earlier today, in Canada, and just like in the US, everybody should understand that if you can't get a program approved on a short code, it's not going to get approved on toll-free. And it ultimately shouldn't be approved on 10DLC when there's eventually a solution for that in Canada. And so we work very closely together, Caitlin and I, with the carriers to ensure that there's an equitable requirements and compliance, and everything's equitable, so there isn't this, we can circumvent rules in one channel versus the other. So what's enticing about Canada? That's the other thing we'll talk more about in July, but one of the things you don't get a lot of is you don't get a lot of really good quantitative analysis on Canada. It often gets lumped into North America, and so it's hard to get really detailed numbers on what is the market size, how much messaging is actually happening. But I can tell you from a qualitative perspective, and being in the industry for as long as I have, I really believe that Canada is an underutilized market. So if you look at things like, if you extrapolate and look at messages per capita versus the US, I still think that there's lots of room for growth in Canada. I think that Canada is also enticing because the consumer base is very engaged in these channels. Like, they rely on messaging services. And so we see that growth as well. And again, I think brands generate a good ROI in the Canadian market. So from a Twilio perspective, that is a market that we're leaning into. And when we ask some of our customers, ISVs, I think Attentive mentioned it today, like, when you think about like your international expansion from the US, what's your most important market? And often they say Canada. Right, that's what they consider to be international expansion. So I think there's ample opportunities, and I touched on it earlier. We're also got some challenges. We're really behind in MMS. We think that there's a big opportunity to get a cross-carrier MMS solution going on short code. It looks like we'll have that soon. There's good stuff to report on that. So I just think that that's one of the enticing things about Canada is I think there's lots of opportunity, lots of growth, good ROI, And it's today we have a lot of reliability and trust. There's trust between the carriers. There's trust between the CWTA and toll free, and then eventually we will deliver a 10DLC solution, because I think that there are very separate use cases that really should live on 10DLC.
So we hope that we've piqued your interest a little bit about messaging in Canada for those of you that don't currently have a presence in the Canadian market. As Paul mentioned earlier, we are very excited to be partnering with MEF on a Canadian event, and I think it's also going to be a leadership forum, so a bit of a smaller group. I think that's something that MEF and CWTA definitely have, that kind of collaborative way of thinking and approaching these events in common. We also both love to throw a good party, and so for those of you that have attended our events in Toronto before, our CWTA event, we do like to have a fun reception. We also have an extra reason to celebrate, because 2023 marks the 20th anniversary of short codes in Canada, and so we think that's as good a reason as any to celebrate and throw a party. We hope that you'll join us. We're really looking forward to developing the agenda for this MEF event. There will likely be some crossover between the agenda for the MEF Toronto event and our CWTA messaging meeting, which is more of kind of a roundtable style meeting. There's a lot of engagement, so if you want a seat at that table, let me know. And I think we'll be working closely with TJ and the MEF team on developing content. Like Paul said, I think looking forward to talking about 10DLC, talking about RCS. The state of RCS. What the future looks like for RCS in Canada, and lots of other good Canadian content. So I think that's about it for us. So save the date, July 18th and 19th. More details to come. And we look forward to hopefully seeing all of you in Toronto.